It's January 30th. What does that mean for the 2024 edition of the Kentucky Derby? Let's take a look.
Trust the Profits is proud to be sponsored by Game of Silks. Go to silks.io to get in the game. Real ownership, real races, real rewards.
Welcome in, everybody. My name is Tim, and you can find me on X/Twitter at RidersUpTim. I wanted to make a quick video and discuss what I think everybody is discussing over the last couple of days. The 29 January Kentucky Derby deadline for trainers that are ineligible to race in the Derby to transfer their horses has passed. So obviously, most people know that Bob Baffert is ineligible to run his horses in the Derby. So did he do like he did the last 2 years and transfer his horses over to Tim Yakteen or another trainer so they would be eligible to run in the Derby? Well, we're going to talk about that. So for those who don't know, and if you're a horse player, I'm sure everybody at this point has an idea that in the 2021 Derby, Bob Baffert won the Derby with Medina Spirit. And after that race, Medina Spirit was ruled ineligible, failed a drug test. And Baffert was put on suspension. That originally was a 2-year suspension. And then in July of last year, Churchill Downs Incorporated came out and extended his 2-year suspension to another year and made it a 3-year suspension, citing continued concerns regarding the threat to the safety and integrity of races that he poses to CDI-owned racetracks. So that meant that Bob Baffert's horses were going to be ineligible this year for the 2024 Derby as well. But as we know, over the last couple of years, Baffert in 2022, he transferred 3 horses over to Tim Yakteen right at the deadline, one of those being Messier, who was the only one to make the Derby field that year. And then last year, he transferred 4 horses over to Yakteen early in the year, and then right at the deadline transferred another 4. And even of all of those horses, only had Reincarnate enter the field. Well, Reincarnate finished 13th. The year before, Messier finished 15th. So that move really wasn't too successful. So I don't know if that had a lot to do with whether or not the owners of these horses decided that they didn't want to transfer their horses. But for whatever reason, all of the owners of the Derby contenders, so to speak, that are being trained currently by Bob Baffert, everyone has decided to keep their horses with Baffert, and none of those are going to transfer over. So there will be no Bob Baffert horses trained by anyone in this year's edition of the Kentucky Derby. I think that's big news. So how does that play out, and what does that mean for the Derby? Well, we'll take a look at that as well as what it means for the preps in a second. But is this really the right call for those owners? I mean, the Kentucky Derby is only the biggest horse race of the year. This year's purse was raised from a $3 million purse to a $5 million purse. So it has to be attractive to everyone. And I think anyone and everyone can see that. But honestly, if you ask me my opinion, and that's what I'm going to give here, I think this probably is the best thing for the horses. If you look at the results of the horses over the last couple of years, they didn't fare out too well. And these were horses who both went into the Derby with fair chances of doing well in the race. So was that a result of changing over to the trainer? Obviously, none of us can say that for sure. But at the same time, I think it definitely could be. While we all know that Tim Yakteen is a former Bob Baffert assistant who now trains on his own, every trainer trains a little differently. Their equipment might be a little different. Even their feed could be different. Who knows? But changing over for the horse might not be in the best interest of the horse and might contribute to why over the last couple of years, things really haven't gone that well for the horses that have transferred over. So the owners, and I'm sure Bob Baffert had a discussion, and they've all decided to stay with Bob Baffert. So what does that mean for the Derby? Well, let's take a look at a few horses here. I think that it starts and ends with Nysos here. And Nysos is a horse that it was going into all of the futures wagers, one of the favorites, the early favorites for the Kentucky Derby. This is a horse that's done really well. As you can see, the horse two firsts in both races so far, won a maiden special weight, and then followed that up with a win in the Bob Hope Grade 3, and is actually entered this weekend in the Robert B. Lewis Stakes. And if you look at that race, the race is really setting up. There are 12 entries currently right now, I believe it is, and I think we're up to 15 entered at one point. But of those, of the 12, 5 of those are trained by Bob Baffert. So I'm not sure that all 5 of these horses are going to get into the race. But if I had to make a guess at which ones are in, obviously Nysos is going to race. I think Coach Prime and Pilot Commander are both horses that could end up in that race as well. Coach Prime is coming off a Los Alamitos Futurity third place finish behind a really good Winstock, another Bob Baffert horse that we'll talk about here in a moment. But Pilot Commander, if you look at that one, Pilot Commander is coming off a second place finish in San Vicente, a Grade 2, and that was Tamuth, another horse that is trained by Bob Baffert that we'll talk about in a second. So Baffert has some legitimate horses this year. Obviously, he's one of the best trainers, and whether you like the guy or you don't like the guy, he's a great trainer, and he's getting results with his horses. And we won't discuss where the results come from and what people think of Bob Baffert, but at the end of the day, the guy is one of the major players in thoroughbred racing today, and his horses have to be respected. And I think that if you look at this field, unfortunately, what could happen is the Kentucky Derby points cannot be awarded to any horse that is being trained by an ineligible trainer. So if Bob Baffert's horses finish, and the more he runs, the more chances he has of finishing in positions that take Kentucky Derby points. Those points, if he finishes first, those 20 points don't just pass on to the next horse, they're gone. So if he finishes in multiple points positions, he could be taking up points that other horses are not going to earn. And if you look at his other horse here, you've got Muth, and Muth is training up to the Rebel Stakes on 24 February. I think Muth is another legitimate top 5 contender for the 2024 Kentucky Derby. And this is another horse that now will not be there and could win one, if not multiple preps leading up to the Kentucky Derby, again, taking points off the board. I think this, as it plays out, as we continue to get into the preps and see how Bob Baffert horses perform, I think this is a major influence in how the Kentucky Derby shapes up for this year and who gets to enter into the starting gate. Because if Bob Baffert's horses are taking points in some of the major places, as many of them are definitely favored to do so, it could really set things up to where the points are spread quite thin, and it could definitely change the complexion of this year's Kentucky Derby field. Have to take a look at Winstock here. This is another horse racing this weekend in the Southwest Stakes. This horse is coming off again a pair of first place finishes after breaking his maiden. He came back to win the Los Alamos Futurity over Coach Prime, finishing third there that we talked about earlier. Couple of other horses here, minor players at this point, looking like Prince of Monaco and Miramati, but these are horses that early on in the year, you can look at Prince of Monaco, started out with 3 straight finishes before going to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile and finishing a disappointing 5th. But who's to say that horse can't come back off of that? And look at the horses right in front of the horse. Fierceness, Muth, Locked. Obviously, we just talked about Muth, but the other two, if you're picking a couple of favorites to the Kentucky Derby right now, that's many people's 1 and 2. So these are all horses to be respected quite a bit. I think Bob Baffert had a really strong crop of 3-year-olds this year, and the fact that he's not going to go into the Derby and his horses are not going to go into the Derby, I don't think it's good for the sport. I won't weigh in on my thoughts of Churchill Downs, but I think after 2+ years, Bob Baffert has served his suspension, and his horses deserved an opportunity to compete in this race because he's got some really good ones. So that's a look at what he's got as far as horses at this point that could potentially have been in the Kentucky Derby that now won't be. So again, I think this is a major influence to how the Kentucky Derby shapes up this year. And my biggest concern is, and if I was Bob Baffert and his owners, I'd be going out right now to win every one of those races, to take all these points away and to see how the Derby shakes out. And honestly, the impact of that and looking at some of these horses potentially having been some of the favorites going into the race, I think it weakens the field. And by spreading the points out more, I think it's going to be super competitive to get into the Kentucky Derby starting gate this year. And it really sets the race up for much of a different race. I'm not sure anybody wants to see a race to where we go into the race having 2 or 3 really strong favorites and everybody else being weak because we took out all of the competitors by taking out every one of the Bob Baffert horses. That's my opinion. What do you think? So please leave a note down in the comments and let me know what your thoughts are about what about Bob Baffert's suspension in Churchill Downs Incorporated? What do you think about that? And what do you think about Baffert's crop and how that impacts the preps in the Kentucky Derby? And as always, if you like our content, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel, and make sure that you check out all of the other videos that we've got coming out this week. It's crazy. So here we've got 4 big Kentucky Derby preps coming up this weekend. And as we get into the beginning of the week, all of the conversation, of course, is about this issue. It's about Bob Baffert and Churchill Downs. And again, I'm not sure it's great for the sport, but what do you think? Let me know.